Hi there, my name is Dmytro, and in this video we're gonna talk about NgRx and Redux. So you asked me quite a lot to make such videos about this library, and with this video I would like to start a video series about this Redux architecture, and in the end we're going to build an application, some simple Kanban board where we're going to use NgRx library and Angular CDK model for drag and drop functionality. So we're gonna kill kind of two birds with one stone. So subscribe to my channel, we are getting started. In this particular video, we are not going to code things, but rather we're going to figure out if the Redux and NgRx in particular is a good fit to your project, if it's right solution, and do we really need it for our applications? Because NgRx is not silver bullet. It has its own benefits as well as drawbacks. So before we start to use this library, this architecture in our application, we have to figure out about pros and cons in order to not turn our project into a mess. So watch this video until the end, and I will give you some checklist where to go with Redux or when you should choose another architectural decision. Okay, so I'm pretty sure you're already aware of Redux, what is this, but for those who is new to the topic, I would like to give some onboarding, but if you already know it, you can use the time codes in the video description and safely jump over this section. And if you are still here, so let's get started, and we're going to start with such a thing called state. So state could be really, there are a lot of states, yeah, it could be the state of router, right? We have different URLs which represent different role state, or we could have two component with some property, and this is the one state, and then we change the property value because of click or whatever, it changes its state, so we have another state, yeah. So this also called the local state or component state, right? But the thing is that in real life applications, we have a bit more complex states, more complex components, more complex relations between these components. And very often our components, they relate on the same slice of data, right? And this is okay if they have parent-child relationships, so we can use inputs and outputs in order to synchronize states, but it can be a little bit tricky when our components do not have such relationships. As example, we have some user list, and in the component we want to render them as just a list, right? But in another component we just want to show the count of users, and they are located in completely different places within our application. Familiar use case, right? So and it turns into a problem when we try to actually synchronize these two states. As example, if I remove the user here, I have to somehow update the counter in my another component. So how usually we share the state between such components? Right, we create just a service, and services in Angular, they're singletons in scope of injector. So once we modify data within our service, all components which relate to the data from this component, they will get the same data. And there is actually nothing, and I would like to highlight nothing bad with this solution. Your application can live with it quite a long time because Actually, it solves your problem without any issues, and which is even more important, this is very straightforward solution. But the problem with this approach you can encounter later on when your application is growing and growing. There are more and more components. These relations between components become more sophisticated. State management becomes really hard, and then the sharing state with the services can turn into unmaintainable thing. Yeah, and this is where Redux can shine, and it tries to give you some order in this chaos, right? So how Redux can make our life easier? Well, originally Redux comes with such a thing like global store, where we store our all possible states in our application. You can imagine this like just a object, the huge object in the memory, and it has different data, different object keys which store some data, and every component can subscribe to this particular slice of data and read these values from it, right? It gives us kind of one source of truth where our components can read the data. But what about updating the data? So in Redux, you are not allowed to update your store from any component or whatever. You can do it only from one centralized place, because it would turn into the mess when every component can change the state, and that's I cannot imagine how to debug such a thing when literally any component can put the wrong data into the state, and then how to figure out which exactly component did it. The one thing which component can do in this case, it can dispatch some action which happens. And action, this is just an object which has the type property which describes what this is unique kind of action identifier, action ID, which says what exactly happened or should happen, and it can also pass some data which should be somehow put to the store or whatever. As example, if we want to remove the user or add the user to our store, we dispatch the action which says that please add to the store, and we give the data, the user data, which should be added to the store, right? Okay, so now we know that components dispatch action, and we have the store, and there should be something in between, right? Some clue between store and the action, so it should be some kind of handler, and such a thing called in Redux reducer. So reducer, it's just a function which takes two arguments. It takes the current state of the store and it takes action. And based on this action, reducer can modify the store and return the new state which will be put to the store. Right? As simple as that. And here it's important to mention that reducer should be a pure function, and pure function, this is the function which don't have side effects. And I think it will be a topic for another video, what is pure function and why Redux enforce you to use this pure function. So I think it would be better to put it to a separate video, but just keep in mind that the reducer function should be pure, and you can for now just go to the internet and read what means the pure functions. But let's keep it simple for this video and move forward and cover this later in another video. So So yeah, now our reducer gets this data, modifies, update the store, and once our store has been modified, our components which subscribe to some certain slice of data will get the new state, and they will re-render it to you if it's necessary, right? So and what is NgRx? How NgRx related to this everything? NgRx, it's a library which implements this pattern and its own reactive way. They heavily using observables, which is a great fit in my opinion with Angular, because Angular built on top of observables, and it works perfectly together. Yeah, and also NgRx provides some extra things, I would say. It's called selectors, and such a thing like effect. And in effects, you can handle your side effects if you have some. As you remember, I mentioned that reducers are pure functions, so they don't have side effects like, I don't know, HTTP calls, whatever. If you want to save data into the local store, this is all these side effects. And if you need to handle this, you should use NgRx effects for these kind of operations. And of course, we will cover it in next videos as well. So this is what NgRx is. And here we are coming closer to the question, do we need Redux at all in our application? And this is absolutely necessary to give yourself the honest answer on this question. And yeah, I can understand that you can feel some itching, like, yeah, let's try it out. Everybody talks about Redux. Redux is very popular library. Everybody uses Redux. Let's try. But no, that's it doesn't work like this. You can really make your life harder with this decision if you make wrong decision. Yeah, it will be hard, because in fact development with Redux is slow. It's 2 times slower than without Redux. Yeah, and you can imagine also, like, even some small feature enforces you to create slice in the global store. Then you have to create reducer for this. Then you have to create actions. Then if you have some async operations or side effects, you have to create effects, and so on. Even for some small feature, you have to do it, and for small projects, it's kind of overkill. With Redux, you have predictable data flow, which makes sense on the huge projects, but the price of it is over-engineering on the small ones. So this is the thing you have to think about. And now let's go to my personal no-go list for the Redux, and let's get started from the first item. And the first one is, you have a small project, or you just starting the project, or you do some kind of prototyping. You definitely don't need Redux there. It just takes a lot of your time, and it gives you, I would say, no benefits at all. Yeah, if you do something small, it makes just no sense. You just bring over engineering and increase the complexity of your project. And the second thing is, when you build your library, or shared component library, this could be a really terrible architectural solution. I saw such a thing, and I can tell you that it makes absolutely no sense to bring state management into your shared component library, because doing this, you enforce all other projects which are using this shared component library to implement also Redux despite they need it or not. Because in your company, you can have different projects with a different scale. You can have the small microservices, you can have the huge applications, and for some of them, Redux overkill. Then try to avoid Redux if you're going to build an application, which is very, very important for your company, but nobody from your team has never worked with Redux. Really think twice, because in Redux, you have to really understand what you are doing. If you don't understand it, in 99% of cases, you will end up with a really buggy application, unmaintainable application, and you will have really hard time with it. And the last thing in this list, I would say, if you have GraphQL Backend, most probably Redux will not be the best choice for it. Most probably you would rather go with Apollo client, which is designed to work with GraphQL. So, or if you're already using this Apollo client, then you definitely don't need the Redux, because Apollo client already handles these state management things its own way, but it does it. And if you introduce also Redux next to Apollo client, you will have most probably two sources of truth, and then you will have hard times trying to synchronize these two states together. And I would recommend you to go with something one, and it would be probably Apollo client. And now let's talk about the cases when the Redux architecture might be the good choice for your application. And the first case would be if you have really huge application, I don't know, 500 components and more, and you have, and in such big applications, you definitely have the situations when you need to share some data across a lot of different components on the different levels, and this is perfect scenario for Redux architecture. The second case, it's if your application has a lot of undo features or reverting or optimistic updates. Those all are good scenarios in order to bring the Redux architecture into your application. Then let's move forward, and another scenario where Redux might be useful is when your application needs to be restorable. What I mean by that, as example, you have some certain application state, and you want to save this state as a, I don't know, object, or save it somewhere in the browser local storage, or you just want to serialize this and transfer to another client, and another client should take this state and restore it on its own side. This is the good scenario, because Redux restoring of the state with the Redux is really trivial task. Another case when I would go immediately with Redux, this is if I am sure that this project is going to be huge, because sometimes, even not sometimes, it's quite usual case in many companies that you have some really huge legacy project and you have to migrate to some modern tech stack, and you already know that this project is big, so it makes sense most probably to go immediately with Redux, because if it's a big project, it has a lot of scenarios I mentioned before, why not to start with Redux immediately? And the last thing I would like to mention is that how to understand that this is already the time to migrate to Redux. And That's not easy to answer, but from my personal observation, I would recommend to go to Redux when you see that you starting to come up with your own pattern. As soon as you see that you trying to somehow orchestrate your services some certain way, or you trying to come up with some, I don't know, conventions, something like this. Once you have a feeling that you're starting to reinvent the wheel, I would say this is a good, like, good moment to stop and think about migrating to Redux architecture. And why I would recommend you to go with the Redux architecture in this case, because okay, I don't want to say such a radical statements. So, but anyway, in 99% of cases, you'll not build something better than open source solutions, especially very popular open source solution like Redux or NgRx, NgXS, whatever. You cannot compete against the whole world, and you cannot document things better than open source frameworks, libraries, and so on. Your documentation will be always outdated. I see this everywhere in every company. This is very rare cases when you have up-to-date documentation about some in-house tools, libraries, whatever. And what is even more important, in my personal opinion, you don't need to spend time teaching your new team members about your unique framework, unique Redux implementation, and things like that. You just can say that, okay, we're using NgRx. The new developer most probably know already at least basics of it. It can ask community on the Stack Overflow. He can or she can go to the official NgRx website and learn documentation, and it will be always up to date. Yeah, and yeah, that's just save a lot of time, and this tool will be always improved by community, and this is absolutely win-win situation. So I would recommend you in these cases to take some open source library and go with this. If you have some super unique application, whatever, you can fork some library, some open source library, and adjust it to your needs. But in 90% cases, you just don't need it. That's like this. Okay, guys, I think this is pretty much everything I would like to share with you regarding Redux and NgRx. And yeah, this is everything I mentioned in this video. It's just my personal thoughts, my personal observations. It is not something set in the stone to go or not to go with Redux. This is team decision. Every application is unique, and this is not possible to give you correct answer, right? And some unique answer which fits to every use cases. But you have my checklist, how I personally take decision regarding this, and I hope it will help you in your decisions for your application. And yeah, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to share these videos with your colleagues if you find this useful, of course. Don't forget to leave comments, because maybe you disagree with some of my statements. Maybe I forgot to mention something. Yeah, let's discuss it. And of course, I wish you a productive week. Take care and see you in the future.